Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Power Partial Pearls. Earlier this week, we um, marked Israel's Memorial Day and Israel's Independence Day. I saw a video recently of soldiers being called up from every corner of the land, rallying to the call to support and defend their country. There is something unique about the Israeli soldier, something special, if you will, an extraordinary strength and an almost inexplicable sense of commitment. I don't know if there are citizens of any other nation, former soldiers, who, when knowing that their country is in peril, is under threat, would drop what they're doing, wherever they may be found, and return to defend their homeland, that is Israel. But to be sure, heroism comes in varied shapes and forms. And beyond the realm of the soldiers, there are also the innocent men, women, children, going about their daily lives, living the dream that is Israel, when suddenly the treacherous arm of terror reaches out and plucks them from this world, denying them their dream and creating a nightmare for their loved ones. They are heroes, make no mistake about it. They are heroes no less. They're victims of extremism, of fundamentalism that always looks to destabilize this seemingly elusive dream of peace. But what these days remind us more than anything is that, true to our Jewish character, we always pick ourselves up and march on resolutely, not because we are oblivious to the plight of those who suffer, but precisely because we owe it to them and their families, and we owe it above all else to their memory. Some years ago, I found myself standing in Theresienstadt, about 40 kilometers outside Prague, and taken to a small courtyard at the end of which was a brick wall, and behind the brick wall was a tiny room. And the guide took a key, opened the tiny room, and it was quite amazing. He said, "This is a makeshift synagogue." Indeed, on one wall in this room was written the Hebrew words, "Da lifnei mi ata omed," know before whom you are standing, clearly determined east in this makeshift synagogue, as one would find within many shuls today we have in Mill Hill above the Ark and the Beis HaMedrash. On another wall, amazingly in beautiful Hebrew lettering, was embossed "Im Eshkachech Yerushalayim," if I forget thee, O Jerusalem. And as I stood there praying, reciting Mincha, I pondered upon the incredible fact that there will have been Jews in that room, knowing that they were praying quite possibly their last, and yet still they lived with a dream and a vision of seeing Jerusalem, of a better tomorrow. That is what sums up the indomitable Jewish spirit. Here's a curious observation. We all know, and of course we celebrate our exodus from Egypt, as we just did a couple of weeks ago. But hardly one, if anyone, knows when our ancestors actually arrived in Israel. That is to say, we know that it was on the 14th of the Hebrew month of Nisan, some 2,448 or a little bit more years ago, that we experienced the exodus from Egypt. We can roughly estimate the 40-year count from then to when they eventually traveled through the desert, but no one knows the exact date when they arrived in Israel. It's not a given thing. It's not marked on any calendar. And I suggest to you the simple but equally compelling explanation is because we've never yet fully arrived. We're always traveling to the promised land. We're still on a journey. The struggle is still ongoing. Chayalim, soldiers, still battle. Victims still fall prey to terror. Rockets still fall. And until that final day, frankly, that long sought-after dream when the world is finally redeemed, the Jew is, to one extent or another, always en route to the promised land. Also worthwhile observing is that Yom Hazikoron, as we all know, always takes place a week after Yom HaShoah, and there is a correlation. It was after we endured the ineffable events of the Holocaust that brave men and women, notwithstanding the trauma endured, made it their life's mission to go to Israel to rebuild once more. They returned to then Palestine. They turned a desert into a land that flows with milk and honey. They created a place that every Jew everywhere can call home, thus ensuring never again. Alas, such commitment comes at a price. There will always be those who could not accept. Always be those who will harbor the hate no matter. Always be those who exist just to try to ensure that we don't exist. And so even as we have our homeland, we pay a heavy price in the process. We think back to so many wars, so much terror, so many lives lost. And what I've mentioned previously is that every year we mention a number of lives lost since Israel's inception. That number grows year on year. And when you think about it, when you really, really think about it, it boggles the mind and it beggars belief that we stand 76 years on and still the number grows. This past year, exponentially beyond all wildest imaginations. Lives are still taken ever so tragically. And to one extent or another, the world still just stands by or indeed condemns. You know, Israel poet Sur Erlich, reflecting on the proximity of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, the other weekend, Yom Hazikoron, Israel's Memorial Day, said the following. I'll say it in Hebrew and then translate. Shnei Yemei Zikaron Smuchim Kol Shana L'Tovat HaChishuv HaKlali Kama Ole Lanu Imedina V'Kama Ole Lanu Beli. Translates essentially to mean Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Memorial Day, is about the terrible price we pay for having a state of our own. Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day, is about the terrible price we paid for not having a state of our own. It was one hot summer. It was 2002. And a day in the middle of August, when my family and myself were enjoying ourselves on the beach in Tel Aviv. I still remember about 5 p.m. when we suddenly realized our then youngest son, or it was Mendy, only 7 years old, he went missing. And we split up. And Chane and I are walking in different directions down the beach. It's 5 p.m. The Matzil, the lifeguard, is no longer on duty. Time stood still. And what was only minutes seemed like an eternity. And at one point, I dare admit, I stopped looking at the sand and I started looking towards the water. And then out of nowhere, a man emerges holding Mendy's hand. My wife spotted him first and was screaming my name. Mendy, it turns out, had wandered off a fair distance, but thankfully had the sense to walk into an ice cream kiosk and tell the man that he was lost. The man, in turn, closed his shop, notwithstanding whatever business he would be losing at that time of day, and proceeded to walk our son up and down the beach until he would recognize his parents. And I remember thanking the man profusely. And I also remember what he said next that will always stay with me. It's okay. I'm a father. I understand. When we think about events of October 7th, they all had fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters or children left bereft. They died simply because they live in the land of Israel. And we say, I'm a father, I'm a mother, I'm a spouse, I'm a child. I understand. The Hebrew language has two words for strength, koach and gevurah. Koach is the strength you need to win a war. Gevurah is the courage you need to make peace. Israel has shown both kinds of strength and made huge sacrifices in doing so. But let's be clear, we in the diaspora, we're the lucky ones. We don't need to risk our lives while the young men and women of Israel do just that in order to protect their families and, frankly, keep a place safe for us should we ever need it. And let me add this. There are people who support the current government in Israel, and there are people who oppose the government. I maintain that it ought to be irrelevant to a Jew anywhere on earth, particularly outside of Israel, who is currently sitting in government. I support Israel, not governments. I've never critiqued Israel as a Canadian Jew or a British resident Jew. Of course, I don't agree with everything every government does, but that's irrelevant. I live in freedom and security of Great Britain, some 3,500 miles away from Israel. I consider it a profound chutzpah and simply wrong to tell Israelis how they should vote and who their government should be. And to be sure, observing such division in Israel strikes at the core of every Jew anywhere. It's fodder for the Israel critics and frankly feeds into the anti-Zionist rhetoric. And that often evolves into increased anti-Semitic attacks as well. But we don't need to add to that by our own airing of public grievances or social media comments. We ought to support Israel if there's a left-wing government or if there's a right-wing government. If you want to critique, make aliyah, then yell and scream all you like, as indeed many do and are doing. But from the UK, just or anywhere else, be seen to be given support. There's an organization in Israel called Toldot Yisrael. It's like a Steven Spielberg Foundation for the creation of Israel. And it records video testimony of thousands of people involved in the founding of the state. Not long ago, an interview was published that brought a fascinating story to light. 1942, The Germans are barreling through North Africa. If Egypt falls to the Nazis, Palestine was next. They were so sure of victory that the SS had already dispatched an Einsatzgruppe, a death squad unit, to Athens to join the forces heading toward the Holy Land. The Haganah decided that if the worst came to the worst, there'd be a last stand, a bit like in Warsaw. The Jews of the Yishuv, as many as possible, would be taken to the top of Mount Carmel, and they would defend themselves. Perhaps help would come, perhaps it would not. And an elderly man describes on video how, as a teenager, he was called to a meeting between Levi Eshkol and all of the teenagers of the Jezreel Valley kibbutzim. And Eshkol told them that boys and girls over the age of 14 are going to be trained to fight the Nazi invaders, and they should be prepared to die, in Eshkol's words, al kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's honor. Thankfully, it never came to that. But I share this with you because every one of our brothers and sisters who die in our homeland, either in war or through terror, die al kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God, either fighting for his land or simply wanting to live the dream. It's easy to be pessimistic. Again, 21st century and the single biggest loss of Jewish lives in a day since the Holocaust. We wonder, when will it end? So it's easy to be pessimistic, but being pessimistic never got us anywhere. If there's anything that we can learn from history, is that we have a tremendous knack for survival. We simply know survival better than any other nation. I don't know, maybe it's our soul, our godly soul within every one of us, and which, when it feels threatened with extinction, starts to go into overdrive, working that much harder. So I prefer to be an optimist. There was an elderly man who stood on a street corner in New York every morning, rain or shine, hot or snow. He was always there, 7:30 a.m. And those passing that corner thought he was waiting for a city bus. Once an individual happened to pass by just when a city bus came and noticed he didn't get on the bus. And there he stood continuously for about 45 minutes, bus after bus passing him by. And then he went home. And he was observed the next day doing exactly the same thing, 7:30, 45 minutes. On the third day, this guy who was observing this walked up to the old man and asked, "Why do you stand here?" And he explained, "I went through the hell of the concentration camps. I lost most of my family. But more than that, I saw so many children being led to their deaths, and I could do nothing about it. And after we were liberated, I thought a great deal about the future of the Jewish people. Could we ever come back? Will we ever come back? How could we ever come back?" And I stand on this corner every morning because standing here has shown me that indeed we have survived and we are stronger today than we have ever been before. Because from this corner in just 45 minutes, 32 school buses loaded with Jewish children going to Jewish schools passed by, 32 buses from one corner alone. So I stand here and maybe I sweat on the hot days and I freeze on the cold ones and I get drenched on the rainy ones, but my heart and my soul are warm. My spirit is alive. My faith in the future is secure. And I'll finish with this because it's always my signature story when I talk about Israel and the Jewish people. The farmer who had an old mule that fell into a deep dry well that began to bray loudly. And hearing his mule bray, the farmer came over and assessed the situation. The well is deep, the mule is heavy. And because the mule is old and the well is dry, the farmer decides, "I'll bury the animal in the well. I can solve two problems at once, put the mule out of his misery and have the well filled." So he called all his neighbors to help him. Shovelful of dirt after shovelful of dirt started to fall on the mule's back, who became hysterical. But as the farmer and his neighbors continued shoveling and the dirt hit his back, a thought struck the mule. It suddenly dawned upon him that every time a shovel load of dirt landed on his back, he should shake it off and step up, creating a little bit of a platform beneath him. And that's what he proceeded to do, blow after blow, shake it off and step up. He kept repeating to encourage himself. No matter how painful the blows or distressing the situation seemed, the old mule just kept right on, shaking it off and stepping up. And it wasn't long before the old mule, battered and exhausted, stepped triumphantly over the wall of that well. That's the story of the Jewish people. That's the story of Israel. Refusing to give in to panic, bitterness, or self-pity, we, the Jewish people, and especially the people of Israel, are a collective affirmation of life. Our existence and our achievements are a living testimony to one of Judaism's greatest messages to humankind, and that is the principled defeat of tragedy by the power of hope. And so we yearn and we pray for peace with our neighbors and unity amongst our own. May God bless us all individually, communally, in our homeland Israel, and indeed throughout the world. May indeed we merit an era of love, laughter, and lasting redemption. And to that, let us say, Amen.